Good morning, Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington, Monday the 11th of January, 2021. Last Saturday, I started looking at the concept of kashrut, or what it means to live kosher. Certainly, eating kosher is part of that, but kosher goes way beyond that. First, though, let me ask a question. You should know the answer to this by heart. Noah took pairs of animals in the ark, according to the story back in Genesis. We looked at the story in Genesis several months ago. Remember how many pairs of animals? 7 is the right answer if you're talking about clean or kosher animals. That is to say, insects that have a jointed leg, like crickets, grasshoppers, and locusts. Animals such as cattle, goats, sheep. Birds, certain kinds of birds that you're allowed to eat. And fish. Well, they didn't have to take fish on the ark. If the world is covered with water, then the fish are already there. Remember, no shellfish. Can't eat ostrich. Why? Because it doesn't fit its order of creation. It has wings and it's a bird, but it doesn't fly. Birds that don't fly are not kosher. If it lives in the ocean and swims, if it has fins and scales, you can eat it. What about the eel? Doesn't really fit. Again, it doesn't seem to fit the cat, and we don't even want to get into the platypus. Oh, there's so many things wrong with that. But still now in chapter 11 of Leviticus, it isn't just the eating or the not eating, but even coming in contact with these things. Verse 24, by these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them, the unclean animals that they have just mentioned, things that you can't eat, whoever carries any part of a carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Okay, so you're unclean. So what? Well, if you're unclean, you're not allowed to make an offering. Your prayers are not going to be heard by God. There are certain things that make us unclean that we can't help. Women are unclean during a certain time and have to wait. Everybody gets unclean by doing things that are normal. If an animal that is kosher, that you can eat, dies, but it isn't by your hand, that is, it may be diseased, now you got to do something with that carcass. It's unclean. And you are unclean because of that. If an unclean animal touches a seed that's set aside, I love this part, the seed is okay as long as the seed is dry. It hasn't been planted. But if the seed is in the soil and is germinating, it's in the process of growing. That infected or unclean animal can now make that whole seed or that whole crop unclean. The idea that water touching something changes it also relates to the Passover law. As I have said before, if water touches flour, in 18 minutes it's leavened, because they understand that there's that much yeast in the air. So you want to make unleavened bread for Passover? You got 17 minutes to add water to that flour, mix it up, pat it down, and get it into a hot oven. 17 minutes. At 18 minutes, it's leavened bread and cannot be used for Passover and for certain Sabbath ceremonies. This is all part of the kashrut, the understanding. Now, 11 verse 29. This is a good way to know what animals were present in the ancient Near East. Well, there's a list of unclean animals here, and we can tell they wouldn't have listed them if they didn't exist. The weasel, the mouse, the great lizard, according to its kind, the gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. What about the newt? I suppose the newt would fit in there as well. These are unclean. Whoever touches any one of them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. Anything upon which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean. And then if it falls into your water supply is unclean. We have an advanced knowledge of microbiology and virology, things like that. We understand that there are things that can make you sick. Food supply, things that you would ingest. How did they know back then? How did they know that certain things would cause them to be sick? They seem to have an advanced understanding of some microbiology. And a lot of the foods that they mentioned there tend to be ones that can make you very sick or poison you even to death. We know that the uncured pork, even today, has a high degree of this little thing called botulinum, a little bacteria that loves to grow on pork. And we also know that pork back then had an infection of worm, the trichina worm. And so both of those were lethal. Still are. We don't see a lot of trichina anymore. Botulism, though, is still very important. I make my own bacon. And the person who taught me to do it said, if you're going to do it, promise me you will use a commercial grade cure. And that's basically sodium nitrate. Okay, you can go to the store and buy uncured bacon. And it will say no added nitrates or nitrites. And then it will say, except those naturally occurring in celery seed, which has a high level of nitrate. I mean, where do we get commercial grade? We get it from natural sources. But if you're going to sell that kind of thing in the store uncured, it has to then be proven in a lab that it has the same amount of nitrates in it as the one that is commercially cured. And since I don't have a lab at home to determine the amount of nitrates in celery seed, I'm not going to grind up my own celery seed and use it in my cure. I'm going to use the commercial cure. I buy it down at Bi-Mart. But we understand that things can kill us if we don't treat them right. Botulism, even though parts of it are used in cosmetics, Botox, really, you're injecting botulism into you in very small amounts. Nonetheless, I guess some people think that that's attractive. I think you're playing with fire when you're taking a lethal bacterium. We know from home canning, if it gets in there and you eat it, you can die. It can explode inside our systems. It can multiply very rapidly. And somehow they understood these things. They understood that there was small, invisible things like yeast that would affect things like flour and water. And it could affect it in ways that they liked and ways that they didn't like. And there were other things that were part of animals and part of even healthy animals. They got sick. And when they got sick, there was something that could be passed on to humans from that animal. They then had to make sure they then wash themselves, wash the clothes, make sure they're dried. This is quite advanced. We're talking 3,000 years ago. And these kosher laws are part of why they were able to build a strong society that actually was able to support an army of their own young men capable of conquering these lands that were occupied by all these other tribes. when God gave them the land of Canaan, well, as I said before, the Canaanites didn't say, "Oh, it's yours. Come on in. I guess we'll build a tent city. I don't know. We'll move to Europe. I guess go to Florida for the winter." No, they had to fight for that land. They're still fighting for it today. People don't just give up their homelands. Why would they? Kosher. Tomorrow we'll look a little bit more about the kosher laws than about kashrut as we work our way through the interesting book of Leviticus.